This is Calder Gospel Radio, and the time is 7:31. It's time for Land Matters with Attorney Gloria Brown. Good evening, Mrs. Brown. God bless you. Always a blessing to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's over
And
to you.
thank you. And good evening, listeners. Welcome again to Land Matters, aired every Tuesday on Cordo Gospel Radio at 7:30 p.m. If you have any questions in relation to land, estate matters, any question, please send a message to 876-868-5109 or 876-535-8186 or 876-387-3183. 876-387-3183. Any question related to land ownership. And remember, you're listening to Call Out Gospel Radio, which is located in Ocherio, St. Anne. And the aim of this station is to impact the lives of persons positively while fulfilling God's purpose. It's important for us to know God's purpose in our lives. I want to thank those who joined me last week on the presentation I did on estate planning. Was oversubscribed, and I'm going to have to redo it because the platform could only take 500 persons, and so many. It seems as if another 500 did not get on. But we'll ensure that the next time that we have the seminar, that we have an unlimited Zoom. But thanks. I thank persons for listening, and I'm hoping that we'll not be forgetful hearers of the word, but we will take this information that we are getting seriously and deal with our estates as we should in time, because we are stewards of what we have. Whatever has been vested in us, whatever we have, whatever assets, we are stewards of them. And we know that it is required of a steward that a man be found faithful. I've been getting more and more inquiries from persons as to adding children in particular to their titles. And I always advocate that a warm gift is better than a cold gift. If you can give your properties while you are alive, it's always better. And one of the reasons why I say that is that it's a cheaper exercise. Probate is costing up to about 8% of the estate value, while to add a name might come out to about 4% or sometimes even less to add names. So I would encourage my listeners as best as possible. If you can deal with these matters while you are alive, it is always best to do so. But there are certain caveats, certain precautions, certain things that you should know. Firstly, if you're going to add a child to the title who is under 18, the title's office is going to lodge a caveat to prevent you from selling the property or doing any dealing, borrowing money, adding anybody else to the title. You're going to be limited. So think carefully when you want to add a name to a title. When persons come into my office and they're buying property in particular and they want to add young children, there are two options that I usually give to the parents. I will let them buy it in the names of the adults alone and do a declaration of trust. What the trust will say is that even though the property was bought from John Brown by Mary Black, and the trust will say Mary Black is holding the property on trust for herself and her name and her children who will be named. And the trust document is stamped for $500 and should be stamped within, I would say, within 6 months. I know the stamp office says a year, but I would encourage listeners to stamp the trust within 6 months. Don't let 6 months pass and it's not stamped. That's 6 months after the property is transferred to you. And the stamp duty on that trust is just $500. So later on, when you want to add the children, as long as you produce the trust document, then you do not have to. You do not have to pay any transfer tax or stamp duty later on. That's one option. Another option, and if you are going to borrow money when you are buying, that's the option that I will advise you to take. Another option, suppose for example you're buying the property cash, you're not going, you have young children under age, and you still want them to be added. When parents insist, then what I do is a reservation clause. So the property will be transferred to the adults and the children. But there'll be a clause to say, suppose for example one child, Peter Green, is under 18. I would transfer it to Mary Green and John Green and Peter Green. But there would be a clause to say reserving unto Mary Green and John Green during the infancy of Peter the right to deal with the property, to transfer, to mortgage, or to sell, to do anything with the property during the infancy of Peter. So the parents, even though all are on the title, the parents would have what we call a reservation. They would have we put in a reservation clause reserving to the parents the right to deal with the property as if they were the sole owners, as long as the child is a minor. When the child reaches an adult, then everybody would own equally. Because it should be noted that you can't put anybody on a title, even a baby who is just born today. As long as an adult is on the title, you can put anybody on it. But you need to be aware, as I said before, that you could run into difficulties because when you put a minor on without the reservation clause, if you put the minor on the title just a straight transfer like that, then most institutions will not lend you money, or the title office is going to block the title so you can't sell or borrow money. And if you want to do that, then you're going to have to go to court to take off that minor. And we know the challenge is there. You're going to have to show that the money you used to buy the property was not trust money that belonged to the minor. And in situations like those, the Administrator General's Department is going to become involved to protect the interest of the minor. So do not hastily do transactions like adding minors to your title without more caution, without more care. So that is something that we need to look at. And when in doubt, make a will. The will is always a good backup. You're not so sure if you want to add the children, especially if you are a young person and you have just had one child. You might have other children later on. It might suit you not to tie up your property like that. So a will is always good, because the good thing about a will is that you can update it anytime you want. You can always redo, remake. So that is always an option that you have. So it suits us not to be too hasty in terms of rushing to deal with the estate planning when the children are young. Estate planning in terms of dealing with the estate plan in terms of making a will, but not dealing with it in terms of adding the persons to title. So be very, very careful of that. Another thing as well is that when you put your children on your title or any of your relatives as part of the estate planning, you have to be cautious, because the NHT, if the children live abroad and parents come to add them, I don't have a problem. But if you add a child who is here, a child who is actively working, and that child does not have a house as yet, then the NHT might say that this person already owns property. When you add the child to the title, the NHT might say this child owns property already. And somebody told me the other day that the NHT, when they bought a property before and wanted their NHT benefit. NHT said that they are not in the business of making people rich, which is really a backward thinking, but that's a story for another time. But if you add your children to your title and they approach the NHT later on, for example, to get a build on own land loan or an open market loan, the NHT is going to say that this child already owns property, and their aim is to give first time buyers ownership of property and not a second time buyer. So you have to be cautious in terms of adding the children. As I said, when in doubt, make a will. Make a will. I also see persons coming in to say, I want to add one child to my title. And usually, when persons come, or two, the first question I ask, how many children do you have? Invariably, the answer is going to be, we have 3 or 4 children, but we just want to add this one. My next question is going to be, if something should happen to you, if you should pass on, God forbid, who do you want to get this property? And they might say all 3 children. Then I would say it's not a good idea to add one. Because if anything should happen to you, it's going to belong to that one alone. And sometimes they might say, I have confidence in that one. But I will say to them afterwards, I will say to them, okay, what if something happens to that child, God forbid now? It's going to go to that child's spouse and children alone, and then they get to understand. So, as an attorney, my responsibility is not to enrich myself and jump to obey instructions, but is to leave my client in a better place, to educate my client. Because a lot of times, a transaction that could have benefited the attorney in hundreds of thousands of dollars might just end up with $15,000 or $20,000, because instead of giving the client what the client asks for, in terms of a transfer. I might just end up making a will, which is a very inexpensive process. But I'm looking at the family dynamics in the long term. So that is something that we need to consider, educate the client, which is why I really hope that more and more persons will listen to these broadcasts, will take part in these conversations, so that persons will be able to educate others, inform others, and let others know what is happening, how things are happening, and how to navigate this land situation. Because the reality is that land is going to be one of the biggest investments that we will make in our lifetime. So we have to be very careful and be very intentional in how we deal with land matters. Also, remember when you add somebody to a title, you can add somebody to a title and they don't even know. Because when you put somebody on your title, if there's no condition on it, then they might not know that their name or their names are on the title. Because, for example, I just get a title for myself, there's no restriction on it, no restrictive covenant, etc. Then I can just go ahead and add my children to it and they don't know. But if I want to take them off now, they have to consent. So you see, sometimes it seems a little bit unfair. People will come and say, but Miss Brown, the child didn't know I put the name on it, but I can't take it off without them know. If you go out the road and see a stranger on the road and say, let me put you on my title, that person becomes an owner with you. That person can move into the property, can move the whole family into the property, and you can't do a thing about it. So when in doubt, make a will. Even though it's more expensive, the cold gift is more expensive because you give it when your hands are cold. Sometimes that is what you need to do. So think about it. Think about your estate planning and be very intentional about it. Know exactly what you are doing, how you are doing it, so that you don't end up in problems later on. You don't make rash decisions. You transfer a property to one child and then you go on and have other children. And then this one child might say, I'm not allowing anybody else on the title. Things like those are things that you need to be very, very careful about. Remember, you're listening to Call Gospel Radio, which is located in Ocho St. Anne. And if you want to send us a question, you have a query, please feel free to send your questions or queries to 876-387-3183. 876-387-3183. You can send me any questions you have, any queries on land ownership. So this evening I'm talking to us about adding persons to title. You can add any number of persons. You can put 100 persons on your title, 1,000. If the titles office runs out of paper, they'll just send and get more. So there's no limit to the number of persons that you can put. And as I said at the start, you can, when parents are adding children to title, always encourage the parents to take a life interest to become life tenants. So the title will read to Gloria Brown and John Brown for the term of their natural lives and after death too. And you name the children Peter Brown, Paul Brown, Nathaniel Brown, etc. And when you add the children, then you also need to look at the tenancy, whether they're going to be joint tenants or tenants in common. So, for example, like I had a client in my office recently who wanted to add 4 children to her title. So I encouraged her to take a life interest. So the property will read to her for life and after death to the children. But I had to discuss with her what tenancy will the children have. If they are joint tenants, that means that if one should die, it will go to the other 3. If a second one should die, it will go to the next 2. And then if 3 should die, then it would go to just the surviving one. And if that one dies, it would only go to the family of the last survivor. So therefore, the relatives of the first 3 who die would get nothing. Very, very important to note. So when I discussed it with the client, we agreed that the children would be tenants in common, in equal share. So each of them would have a quarter that they can will to their own children. So the tenancy is important. And sometimes persons will ask which tenancy is better, joint tenants or tenants in common. There's no better one. It depends on your situation. You're going to have to look at your situation and decide on the tenancy. So suppose, for example, two persons should come into my office, like a couple, and they want to buy a property. I'm going to ask them, for example, Mr. Black, if you should die, who do you want to get your share? If Mr. Black says Mrs. Black, and I say Mrs. Black, if you should die, who do you want to get your share? And she says Mr. Black, then I will make them joint tenants. So joint tenants because each would want the other to get their share. If Mr. Black says I want my daughter to get my share, and Mrs. Black says I want my son to get my share, then I'm going to make them tenants in common so each of them can will to whoever they want to. And that is important to note. Also, when you're tenants in common, you can have unequal shares. So, for example, if Mr. Black should say, I provided most of the money, I provided 3/4 of the money to buy this property, and Mrs. Brown only provided a quarter, so I should have a bigger share. Then Mr. Brown can get a 3/4 share. We call it three undivided 1/4 share. And then Mrs. Brown will have a 1/4 share, one undivided 1/4 share. So that's the advantage of the tenant. When you're tenants in common, persons can have individual different shares. When you're joint tenants, there's no particular share. And even in making the will and willing it to your children, the tenancy is also important. And the words that you use will determine whether people are joint tenants or tenants in common. So in the will, you might say, I'm going to transfer it to the children equally. From you use the word equally, then you know that they are going to be tenants in common. Or you use share and share alike. Or you give 1 acre or the piece from the mango tree to the pear tree. Then from you start giving pieces or you start giving a certain size, then they're going to be tenants in common, which means that they will have their shares, even if they pass on, it will fall into their estates. If if you don't if you want them to be jointly where one passes on and the other will get it, then you use the word jointly. And if no word is used, then we presume. So suppose you say, I will my house to my children, and you don't, after that, you just name the children or just to my children. There's a presumption that they are joint tenants, which means whoever lives the longer or the longest is going to own it. So the words in the will are important. Words in wills are important. So sometimes it might suit you to get a lawyer to do the will for you instead of doing it yourself. It might suit you to get a lawyer because sometimes, especially if your estate is a little bit complex, you're not sure who to get what and how to word it. It might suit you to get a lawyer to assist you in situations like that. You're listening to Cordo Gospel Radio, located in Ocho St. Anne, with its mandate to impact the lives of persons positively while fulfilling God's purpose. And we welcome all of you who are joining us on the radio via the radio stream or on the app in the Google Play Store, or if you are on the YouTube channel. We thank you so much for listening to Land Matters, which is aired every Tuesday. For the next month, Land Matters should be on for the next month, for the entire month of May. So we invite you to listen. You can always find the YouTube channel for Call Gospel Radio, where you can also listen to the the program, not just to Land Matters, but to all the other offerings from Called Out Gospel Radio. And this evening, I'm talking to you about adding persons to your title or determining whether or not you should add persons, so giving the warm gift while your hands are warm, or giving the cold gift, giving it to them in your will. And it's going to be dependent on your situation. Sometimes persons cannot afford to do the transaction while their hands are warm. They can't afford to do the transfer to add the children. And in situations like those, I encourage them to make the will. But I'm begging my listeners, please make your wills. Do not say to yourselves that making a will, you're going to die if you make a will, etc. Do not say that, because the thing is, whereas we know that regardless of what we say or what, okay, then we are going to unless we become like Enoch, who walked with God and he was not because God took him, or Elijah, who went up in the chariot of fire. Otherwise, they said the probability of living forever is really zero. Otherwise, living forever, but not on this earth right now, not right now. Okay, eternal life afterwards. But let us not just sit down complacent and say, hey, I'm going to make a will or I'm not going to make one. Let us be very intentionally, and intentional, so I'm using that word quite a few times. It's something that we intend to do. Let us plan and sort out our affairs while the blood is running warm in our veins. Please remember, you may send me a text message to 876-387-3183 if you have any question, any queries. 876-387-3183. And you're listening to Land Matters on Called Out Gospel Radio. And your feedback is important. If you have, remember, you can also add your spouse to your title. And that's something I want persons to be aware of. That under the Property Rights of Spouses Act, that's a piece of legislation that I'm going to look at it maybe next week or so. Was under the Property Rights of Spouses Act. If the property is in the name of one spouse and you want to add the other spouse, and it is a family home, it is where you live with each other, then there's no duty to be paid. No duty to be paid when you are under the Property Rights of Spouses Act. When you're adding your spouse, no duty. And that's important because sometimes the property was in one spouse's name alone, and they want to the other one. Sometimes one party wants to spend some extra money. Maybe you're getting a build on home improvement loan, and it would not suit you to get your home improvement loan and not protect your interest. So I encourage, like, couples. For example, the property is in the wife's name alone. I would encourage the husband. It is not a good idea to go and expand on that house or improve that house if you don't have an interest in it. If your name not on it, it's not a good idea because a lot of times these things cause a lot of problems. If you find that the other party might not want your name, then maybe it's a good opportunity to look for a second house for the family, because we should not just sit down as persons and say we have a house already. That's why, so we don't need a second one. That we need as a people to build some amount of legacy, because the more we have in us, the more we are able to help others. Because a lot of us will not be able to give the help to the neighbors and the friends and the church, etc., because we ourselves are struggling. So we need to create some kind of generational wealth. And as Black people, we have not been able to do that very well because we have been kept out of the formal system for too long. We're in an education system where only about maybe 30% of the schools really really maximizing the output in terms of the children. So a lot of our children are in schools that are failing, and we'll see it when, as soon as the CSEC results come out, where a lot of the schools are just 1%. And maybe we shouldn't really say they are failing, but maybe what we need to do is to revisit how we are looking at education, because they are failing because of really what we are using to measure. Because a lot of these schools that we are saying are failing, and I take back the word failing, they are excellent at skills. Okay, they are doing very, very well in terms of teaching the children skills. And skills, that's really the way to go, because a lot of us who really who really pursuing these business and law and different things, a lot of us really, if we got a skill, we probably would do much better. It's if you call a plumber now or a builder, a lot of them literally hiding from you because they have so many jobs to do, so many jobs that they can't even manage, because a good plumber, a good electrician, hard to find. They are juggling jobs. So we probably need to be talking to our children more about getting some of these skills, more than sitting down in offices working 9 to 5 and the 25th of the month see so far away. So some of our children, especially some of our young men who are sitting idly by, you really should go to Hard Trust, where there are so many opportunities, and really try to get a skill. A lot of the youth on the corner who say nothing is going on for them. Heart is begging a lot of them to come to be trained, to learn to drive a forklift, learn to drive a truck, learn. There are so many things to learn. Farming. Sometimes when you look at some of the vegetables and see the prices in the supermarkets, for those of us who buy in the supermarkets, the things are $1,000 when you just because they are in kilometers and so on, kilograms. I'm sorry, and grams, where we're not realizing that they are literally unaffordable. So we need to look at telling our children to maybe get a good skill, mason, plumbing, there are so many of them, electricians, mechanics. These are excellent skills that we need to let our children know that. And of course, we know anything that has to do with computer, because that is really the way to go. Because we realize that AI is coming to take away a lot of these jobs that we say we are business people, we are accountants, and so on. AI can solve a lot of these things now. So many of us need to be looking. I don't think AI will really be able to fix the pipes so easily, or a lot of, or wire the house. So we need to be maybe revisiting how we are looking at things, and they look and maybe steer our children in some other ways. And some of the schools that we claim are failing, we realize that many of them are succeeding because they are training they are training people for the world of work. So we need to really have some conversation with our children, so we can create some kind of wealth. Because a lot of the children, as parents, we are going to be the ones who really need to help them to get a house early, because some of them will not be able to find the deposit. Because when you realize land is really out of the reach of the average person, I was speaking to a realtor last week, and he was saying to me that the houses that were being sold for 18 million are now being sold for 24 million. Okay, that's a 33 and a third percent increase, because whenever the NHD increases the limit, okay, how much you can get to borrow the prices of houses are tied to that, which is kind of a little unreasonable. So anytime housing trust say you can get, for example, they say you can get 21 million, the $60 million house is just moved to 21 million. Jamaica is a strange place. That is why a lot of people say it is not a place. It is a very, very strange place. You just move the NHT figures and everything will move up accordingly. So there's a lot that we need to know about, and we need to realize that we have to be good stewards in terms of creating some amount of legacy wealth for our children, so they can have a start in life, and not an each generation not starting over. So thank you, listeners, for listening to me this evening. Please tell somebody about the program Land Matters, so they can go on the YouTube and learn some things. We need to educate ourselves, because knowledge is power. And the knowledge that we gain today is going to be able to be used to help our children and the future generation, so that they will not make some of the mistakes that our generation has made. So remember that you're listening to Cordell Gospel Radio, and this is Land Matters, aired every Tuesday, and it will be aired for the next month, throughout the month of May, on Cordell Gospel Radio. And even afterwards, I invite you to send me your questions or comments to 876-387-3183. I want to say thanks to the team at Cordell Gospel Radio and to the listeners. Have a good evening.